Canada's EV mandates, pro versus no. Insights on the public debate. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. Today I'd like to have a look at the public debate about the EV mandates, offer some insights, and also have a look at some of the undue influence behind the scenes. So let's get at it. EV mandates, should they stay or should they go? And do they fight climate change? So 5 auto CEOs warned Carney in May that EV mandate would inflict serious damage across industry. And Dan McTeague is wondering why the mainstream press isn't covering this topic. Last time he checked, the auto sector is Ontario's #1 economic engine. Net zero equals economic collapse. The federal government says electric vehicle mandate must reflect the current times. Automakers want Canada to scrap its EV sales mandate. What would that do to emissions? Amid tariffs and falling sales, is Canada's EV mandate doomed? All very good questions. So should we keep it or cancel it? Well, here is the Liberal promise: 100% zero emissions car sales by 2035. And not only will it accelerate the transition of the federal fleet to zero emissions, it will reduce pollution and help fight climate change. But social media has been ablaze with pro versus no on EVs. So on the pro side, we see the EV mandates are good climate policy because they work. They will drive the shift away from gas-powered vehicles while protecting affordability for Canadians. Cancelling EV sales targets could cost 11,000 Canadian lives, climate and health experts warn. Yet, on the no side, Mike's Money Talk says EV sales are down 44% from last year. They're only 6% of total car sales in Canada. And yet, starting next year, 20% of all vehicles sold must be EVs. And here's Max Fawcett, journo with the National Observer, saying that the Conservatives are trying to pick a fight over electric vehicles. It so happens, so is Donald Trump and his MAGA regime. But when we look at all the things behind the scenes, what do we find? We find the Canadian Climate Institute is a charity that is 79.76% funded by government. That the Atmospheric Fund is also funded by government. And that this journalist, Mike Fawcett, is also at an organization funded or supported by government. And of course, the Tyee weighs in. Killing the EV mandate will bring big health costs, and this is the Atmospheric Fund. And it's part of the Low Carbon Cities Canada, known as the LC3. So they're pushing for the EV standard, and they're saying when you look at these kind of numbers of avoided deaths that can be achieved and other health benefits, I think it could purely justify the policy on health grounds, even if we didn't have a climate crisis on our hands. And the journalist claims that climate change and health are inextricably linked. Well, how about that? Those are more government-funded cheerleaders for EVs. So the Tyee has been supported by government. And look at this. The Atmospheric Fund gets money from the LC3 fund. And how many municipal taxpayers and councillors even know the LC3 exists? They got $530 million from the federal government. And ironically, here's what's happening with health and fossil fuel use. It looks like climate change has not affected us at all health-wise. So this seems to be a false statement. And of course, some groups must defend their claims. Some time ago, Clean Energy Canada made the claim that there would be 1.3 million Canadians employed in EV-related jobs in 2050. Likewise, the Pembina Institute claimed that the net zero jobs economy in 2050 by sector would employ 723,000 people in the EV sector. Of course, more government funding for the pro-EV mandate. We see here that Clean Energy Canada, under the umbrella of Simon Fraser University, has received funding to promote greater awareness among Canadians of zero-emission and low-emission options in the medium and heavy-duty vehicles sector. And Pembina Institute has also been funded by government. Look at this lovely number here, $923,079. That was in 2023. So the headline here is that this environment group warns against repealing the federal electric vehicle mandate. But it doesn't have a headline about the CEOs, the people who actually work in the industry and make the vehicles, repeated their calls for the mandate to be repealed. And of course, a very popular topic on social media was Norway, Norway, Norway. Look at this. 9 out of 10 new cars sold in Norway last year were powered by battery only. Wow. Well, Mike's Money Talks points out that, yeah, there's big subsidies, and they would cost in the order of $1,200 to $1,900 per ton CO2 emission reduction. And in Canada, our subsidies cost about $451 per ton CO2. And of course, the Norway example became popular, making some people long for a carbon tax again. So we have here Heather Exner-Pirot, who's with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, stating that the every ton of CO2 that the program has displaced in Norway is equivalent to paying $1,700 US. So that would be like a $1,700 carbon tax. And Andrew Leach, who helped put together the climate plan under the Notley government and the carbon tax that came with it, is longing for a national price on emissions again. But Canada is not Norway. Norway runs on hydro. You can see that Canada is very big and Norway is very small. We have about 40 million people. They have about 5. Most of their people live down here at the bottom of the bell, and the rest of Canada, we've got people up here and down here and all across here. So that's a lot of transmission lines. And here's the energy mix in Norway. It's pretty much all hydro. That's from the IEA. Now, even the Canadian Climate Institute, the government-funded charity, is claiming that we will have to double or triple or more Canada's power grid. Now, that will cost billions of dollars and will take years. And, of course, EVs need electrical power. We don't have enough power generation right now. And this is from our blog, contributed by Kent Zare, professional engineer, back in 2019. This is when the mandates were less restrictive. The goal was 2040. But at the time, he said that we would require at least 8 more projects, which would be about the size of Site C Dam in BC or Muskrat Falls in Newfoundland and Labrador. Combined, they have the capacity of 1,924 megawatts if they meet the design capacity. Well, both these projects are billions of dollars over budget, and both have technical issues, and both took about 30 years to get going and get built. So there are no big projects like this on the table. There are no optimal places left in Canada for hydro. And you can imagine that the environmental groups and Indigenous groups would probably not receive a new hydro dam very well as a nation-building project. And Canada already subsidizes EVs at $59,000 per vehicle. This is not sustainable. So you can read this on our website. Look at the hidden subsidies. Your neighbor's thinking about buying a new battery-powered electric vehicle. Might be a good deal for him, but as a taxpayer, are you going to be happy paying your share of the $59,000 in subsidies for his new car? Okay, you say, well, that sounds absurd. Certainly you're exaggerating. What about the states? Well, U.S. subsidies are about the same. EVs are subsidized at about $50,000 per vehicle, U.S. This is not sustainable. So the lesson to be learned from this study here, overcharged expectations, is that markets, not government, drive innovation and efficiency. And as for the claim that EVs are green, well, Toyota estimated that the amount of materials to make one EV battery can be used to make 90 hybrid batteries, and those 90 hybrids will result in 37 times more emissions reductions over their lifetime than one EV. Now, a curious thing is happening in the U.S. As you may have noted from my comments above, it seems that groups are collaborating somehow to send a singular message. And in fact, in the U.S., they found what the House Judiciary Committee, Republican House Judiciary Committee, calls the Climate Cartel. And based on this research, millions of documents, hundreds of hours of testimony, they claim that the Climate Cartel has declared war on the American way of life. The Climate Cartel is waging a global world war for net zero against disfavored American companies, including those in the fossil fuel, aviation, and farming industries that allow Americans to drive, fly, and eat. So maybe we have something like that going on here. What do you think? And this is big. One of the outcomes of that report on the so-called Climate Cartel is that Texas and a number of attorneys general, state attorneys general in the U.S. has taken BlackRock and other fund managers to court. So this is probably one reason why banks have left the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero and the Net Zero Banking Alliance and other net zero coalitions, because this is based on antitrust allegations for which there are huge financial and perhaps criminal penalties in the states. So that's all related to the Climate Cartel. And meanwhile, if we're talking about EVs and climate change, our largest trading partner, the U.S., has put climate catastrophe science under the magnifying glass. So they're looking at the U.S. motor vehicle emissions, and the scale problem can be illustrated with reference to U.S. motor vehicles. So there is what's called an endangerment finding that was made in 2009, focusing on CO2 emissions from cars and light-duty trucks. And this is largely how all of the regulations came into being. So the people who wrote this report did the math, and they said, well, okay, two questions naturally arise. How large a reduction in CO2 emissions would result from such regulation? And what would be the climate impact of such regulation? And they found out it's almost nothing. So they found that to a first approximation, we can say that even eliminating all U.S. vehicle-based emissions would retard the accumulation of CO2 in the atmosphere by a year or two over a century. And more specifically, the impact of reducing the rate of global warming by eliminating U.S. vehicle CO2 emissions would be far below the limits of measurability. Consequently, in contrast to the case of local air contaminants like particulates and ozone, even the most aggressive regulatory actions on GHG emissions from U.S. vehicles cannot be expected to remediate alleged climate dangers to the U.S. public on any measurable scale. So what does that mean for Canada? Well, we are about 1/10 of the size of the U.S. market. So if we're 1/10 of the size of the U.S. market and it's immeasurable there, it's even more immeasurable here. And yet these policies are costing us billions of dollars and perhaps destroying some of our major industries like the auto sector, right? And if we look at this analysis in Canada that was done by Ross McKittrick for the Fraser Institute, this is specifically about global warming. So he's saying that if we prorate the findings regarding the U.S. effects, prorating the average temperature as of 2100 would be reduced by 0.031 degrees Celsius compared to if the U.S. did nothing. But prorating this by the size of Canada's proposed emissions reduction, we find the global average temperature would be reduced by 0.007 degrees Celsius. That's 7/1000ths of a degree Celsius as of 2100, compared to the case if Canada does nothing. And furthermore, in the U.S., a devastating blow to the climate cult and a victory for industry and the public, the Environmental Protection Agency is going to, or proposing to, rescind the Obama-era endangerment finding. And that was their finding that set off all the regulations that paved the way for electric vehicle mandates. And they're saying that if finalized, this proposal would undo the underpinning of $1 trillion in costly regulations and save more than $54 billion annually. Now, ironically, in Canada, foreign-funded interference changed Canada's policy. Most people don't even know this. But the Sierra Club of Canada received from the Oak Foundation in 2005 $217,893 US, I presume. And the purpose was to provide overall coordination of Canadian NGOs working on climate change in Canada to have greenhouse gas emissions classified as pollutants under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and to create and administer a climate change action fund. So that's what happened. All those ENGOs got together, worked together, and they did get greenhouse gas emissions classified as pollutants. But this is foreign interference. The Oak Foundation is in Switzerland, and Oak is also part of the Climate Works Foundation, which is listed in that so-called Climate Cartel report. Now, what gets traded between Canada and the U.S.? Well, the U.S. buys more raw materials from Canada, but we also sell $60.1 billion in vehicles and auto parts to the U.S. And can Canada be our own best customer? Well, as Lee Humphrey points out here, we have 42 million customers versus 350 million customers in the U.S. Can't be a winning formula. And finally, are EVs displacing gas and diesel? Well, no, they've had very little impact on global gas and diesel demand. Global liquids gas diesel consumption in 2024 was 104.7 million barrels per day, by far the all-time high. So, contrary to media claims, electric vehicles have barely made a dent in global liquids demands, and you can read that in this report. So really, it sounds like these guys are greenwashing us. They're telling us the government and tax-funded supported organizations, Canadian Climate Institute, the Atmospheric Fund, Clean Energy Canada, Pembina Institute, National Observer, the Tyee, they all tried to make the case that EVs are greener, have health benefits, will fight climate change, and that 100% zero-emission vehicles, car sales, can be implemented by 2035. So you've seen the evidence. None of these claims are true. And there's one more barrier. There's no material supply chain. Okay? So if you're going to make a whole bunch of EVs, you need a lot of special minerals in quantity that you don't need for regular cars. The regular ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars, use relatively common materials. And this study was done by Professor Simon Michaud, who simply extrapolated the mining of these materials in 2019, extrapolated it out to the needs to create the generation of technology units to phase out fossil fuels, 1 generation. And he found that it would take years, sometimes thousands of years, to mine the sufficient minerals. So for copper, 189 years, nickel, 400 years, lithium, almost 10,000 years, graphite, 1,700, etc., etc. You get the gist. So you can read that in this report by Robert Lyman, which is also on our blog. So join us in the race from net zero. Please get the facts. Get our little book. It's only 88 pages, and it gives you the facts on 22 prominent climate topics. It makes it quite easy to understand whether or not the things we're being promised are doable. And as I showed you with those numbers, like we would reduce global warming 7/1000ths of a degree Celsius if we met our climate targets, it gives you those kinds of parameters where you can go, what? Why are we doing this? It's absurd. It's ridiculous. So pro versus no, I don't know what you think about the EV mandates, but now you have some more information. And please like, subscribe, and share. And please give us comments down below. We'd like to hear your arguments, whatever they are. Thanks very much for watching this video, and please make sure that you order your copy of Energy and Climate at a Glance. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.